Here we go.
Okay.
All right, Kevin Iole here with Scott Coker, the president of Bellator MMA. Scott, thanks for being with me. I really appreciate it. You're one of the big wigs in the business, and always appreciate chatting fights with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. It's been a
So
long time, Kevin. We got to know each other. It was, I think, 2001 at the K1. It's
it
been a
was a
while.
long time. Yeah, we've been in a lot of different fights together. I remember one time when you and I were I was covering a fight that you were promoting, and the whole press conference was in Japanese, and the winner of the tournament was German. I'm like, what do I do? That was one of my not so fun nights covering fighting.
Well, you know what? There's some great fights back then, but that was our beginning in Vegas there back in the early 2000s. But it's been a great relationship. I've always appreciated your work and your fairness, and I'm glad you're doing this.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, I just wanted to get you on to kind of, you got a lot of stuff going on, but I first wanted to ask you, since we haven't had this format for a while, 3.5 years basically since you've taken over Bellator. Let's talk about where you are, where you came from. What was your vision when you took over, and do you feel like you're now where you wanted to be 3.5 years later?
Kevin, I honestly feel like we're ahead of the curve right now. And when I came into Viacom and I sat down with Kevin, we talked about me coming on board, and he said, "Well, what do you think?" I think it's going to be a 5-year project to get to this point. And I think it took about 3 years to get there. Everybody worked hard. It's been a great team effort. Viacom, as you know, has a lot of resources that it can put behind projects, and I think that's why we're way ahead of the curve, because they said, "Hey, you want to go sign this guy? Go sign him. You want to sign that guy? Go sign him. You want to make a change? You want to make a change here or there? Go ahead and do it." It's like they've been kind of giving me carte blanche on the fight side and the promotional side of it. So I feel really good about where we're at. I think that we're doing some great work, and I think it's been a lot of fun.
When you looked, let's go back, and I know you talked about it a lot at the time, but when you looked at where Bellator was in 2014, what were the problems that you saw?
I looked at it from a fan perspective as well. It's like, when you have a tournament format, but you don't have any stars going into the tournament, then I'm not a fan of the tournament at that point. I mean, I think really martial arts there should be tournaments in martial arts, because that's the foundation of it. And that's why we did the Strikeforce 2010 World Grand Prix, and that's why we're doing the Grand Prix now. But that's something that can't happen organically. We started building this roster of great talent, like of talent, and we got Fedor on board, we got Rampage back on board, we got Frank Mir, we got Roy Nelson. I mean, it just said, okay, now we have 8 big brand names, and we should do something with these guys. But just to do tournaments, I'm not a fan of just eight people going to fight in a tournament. So that's kind of what the format was find put these guys together, and then they were doing these shows that I would say they're kind of in remote locations, no stadium fights, kind of just these small shows. Which, listen, I think that one thing I learned from Showtime when I was with them was they have a great series called Showbox, as you know. And how many world champions and real big
Ton of
price?
them, right?
Oh, 100, or maybe Gordon Hall told me like 200 one time or something like that. Champions or close contenders have come out of that, and I said, we have to continue those events and do small shows so that to continue to build the talent, because it's acting like your own feeder system. But you also have to do big fights, and big fights means big names, big stars, big arenas, big production, and that's what we turned it into about 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, and it's been a wild ride since then. Believe me.
A lot of stuff I want to get to with you. I want to talk about Bellator 192, which is a week from this Saturday. I want to ask you a lot of questions about that. But one of the things I think you've been great at, and I thought when you took over Bellator MMA, it was going to make a big difference, was the talent level. And you were always so good at other places at finding young talent and developing it. And for people who may not know, I don't think that's many in the audience, but you were the guy that developed Nick Diaz into an elite fighter, and Luke Rockhold and Ronda Rousey and Misha Tate and Gina Carano. I mean, there's so many of them. Half the UFC's roster, I think, came up through some promotion that you were working with. And I'm curious, like, what do you look for when you're looking at young fighters? What is it that you're looking for? And do you project, or do you just take them where they are at the time when you're thinking of signing them?
That's one of the things we take a lot of pride in is that through different scouts around the world, especially around this country, or people that are close friends of mine, like the Bob Cooks or Javier Mendez, and they say, hey, you need to go sign this kid, Hispanic kid. He lives in San Francisco, fights in Japan, fights out of Tachi Palace, but he's young. You got to go get him. And that was Gilbert Melendez, right? So the people that have continued to deliver these big names were the guys I've always gone back to and really counted on their experience. And they said, hey, I got this wrestler guy. Want to come meet him? I said, sure. He was in the 2000 Olympics in China, but he didn't make weight and he passed out. Didn't work. Something happened, but now he's an OSU wrestling coach and he wants to be a fighter. So I said, all right, come down. We met, and that was Daniel Cormier, before he had his first fight. And then Luke Rockhold, hey, here's this good-looking kid, jiu-jitsu guy. He needs to learn his stand-up, and he's 19-year-old Luke Rockhold, right? So, these guys have come to me from different sources, but you're right. I think that we look for a certain X factor in them as well. Are they just a great fighter, or do they bring more to the table? Can they be built into a big star? And I think that we're good star identifiers, Kevin, but we're also good star builders, and I think we know how to put them into this machine and drive the machine, and then eventually they have to carry the work at some point. They have to be able to, be a great fighter, but we'll give them every opportunity to get to that point where they have, maybe they have some fights that we're testing him out. Like I remember DC's first couple fights, we put him against certain wrestlers because we knew that was going to be his strong suit. But before you know it, this guy could kickbox too. It was like, overnight he became this great kickboxer in a year and a half, tremendous athlete. So, we look for certain things in these fighters that go beyond just fighting. And if they can carry the weight, with the X factor and they can fight, then we really try to put them in the machine and drive them hard.
I don't want to have you talking about UFC fighters, but since you have a relationship with Cormier, I want to ask you this question. He seems like one of the great fighters in the world to me, top 3, 4 in the world. And yet he has that Jon Jones thing that hangover he can't get over. Do you feel bad, like, when you see that happen, even though Daniel's not with you anymore, do you feel a sense of loyalty to him because he came up with you and was associated with, you won your Grand Prix, did a lot of stuff under the Strikeforce banner?
Well, the way I look at it is that these guys are personal friends, especially DC and the guys that live around here. They're friends. So to me, I'm always going to root for them, and I always tell them, hey, you might be fighting somewhere else, but this is where this is your home. This is where you came from, and this is where you got your start. So we'll always be friends. We'll always have a good relationship. Yeah, that's I know that's a sour a taste in his mouth, and he wants to hopefully avenge that loss one day.
As we talk about you signing free agents and building your roster, I want to give an example of something that I said, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, when you signed Benson Henderson. At the time, Benson Henderson and Aljamain Sterling were both free agents, and a lot of people thought you were going to sign both of them. Of course, you signed Benson. And I had written at the time, and I know some people in Bellator were rankled at what I wrote. I said it was no surprise that you signed Benson Henderson because he fit your model. I thought, he was a TV fighter at that point. Where I looked at Aljamain Sterling as a young developing guy who might be a pay-per-view product down the road. He hasn't really developed that way yet. So I kind of didn't surprise me that you signed Henderson and did not sign Sterling. Was that a right assessment of sort of how you read things? Like, hey, we're looking at guys that can be on Spike, or I guess now the Paramount Network, and go there, and not necessarily pay-per-view stars?
I tell you, with that specific situation, Kevin, it wasn't that we thought that, he was a pay-per-view fighter, but what we did know was Benson Henderson is a brand already. He already has a brand name. He has a brand following. People recognize him. Like if this kid walks down the street, people know who he is, right? And I'm talking like the shopping mall, and because I've seen him around San Jose, and people are like, hey, there's Benson Henderson, or there's Rampage Jackson. People know who these fighters are. And with Sterling, he was just kind of beginning, and this is kind of like probably his first renewal in his contract. And I just felt like, look, if you guys want to go after both, this is what our our like our business should look like. And I don't think we can make it work with Sterling, and he chose to stay there. And you know, good for him. But I'm happy with Simon Benson. He's had some tough fights here,
Yes, he
but
has.
Kevin, there's some tough fighters here at Bellator. And some of the world's best are here competing day in and day out. And I think that Henderson will come back. He had knee surgery, and we're looking forward to having him back. Probably in the next 3-4 months.
The one thing that I think that I haven't been crazy about that you've done is the tentpole fights, right? And I know you do them for a specific reason. So I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that. I'll say my objection to it, and I'll get your reaction to it. And when Scott talks about tentpole fights, he's talking about the late Kimbo Slice fighting Ken Shamrock, fighters who'd been around the sport of MMA for many, many years, had a big profile, maybe weren't still in their primes as fighters, but guys that the average person, not a hardcore MMA fan, would know and have those fights. I've kind of been against those. You have obviously been in favor of those. Why? What is it that you like about those fights, and what do you think that they do for Bellator?
Well, I do think that let's quantify this, Kevin, because I think this is really important.
Okay.
And I think you should come to our tentpole January 20th. Because then you get to really see it and feel it.
Okay.
Because it's not just about like the one super fight between Rampage Jackson and Chael Sonnen, right? It's about the entire event, and we have Rory MacDonald on there. That's
I want to talk to you about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Douglas Lima. I mean, that's going to be a killer fight. But
Right.
we have Michael Chandler on the fight. A tentpole means that this is an event that's going to be one of our big stadium shows. That's bigger than our normal monthly show. That is above and beyond in promotion and marketing and really support. And we do all these in the big arenas. But I would say if you quantified the fights that we did, let's say like the jerk putting into the box, there might be like 4 fights in 3 years. Kevin, we've probably done 20 fights of these tentpoles, and there's like 3 of them that fall in that category that you're talking about, right? So
Tito and
I
Chael
think
would
that,
follow in, wouldn't it?
pardon me?
Tito and Chael, Kimbo and Dada, Kimbo and Ken. I think.
Well, I don't think they're all in the same category. I think that when you look at like Rampage fighting Chael, I mean, I still think these guys, on any given day can compete. They're the Shamrock Gracie thing. That was something that as when I grew up, that's what I grew up watching, right? And to me, I was like, hey, what would it look like if we put them back into the cage? And at their age and see what happens. And you know what, to me that that was a competitive fight. And so to me, they're just testing themselves at an older age. But our tent poles are not guys that are all Shamrock versus Gracie. At their later years. I mean, we have a lot of great fights on these tentpole fight cards, and I think that we should really put that. We should quantify that before we say that. I would just say to generalize.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, let's talk about the heavyweight Grand Prix. One of the questions I had, you're taking guys from bringing them up in weight. Chael's going up from middleweight or light heavyweight up to heavyweight. Ryan Bader, that your light heavyweight champion, a very strong fighter, moving up to heavyweight. I'm curious, your thought process in doing that. I mean, will Ryan Bader, if he does not win the Grand Prix, does he go back and is he still your light heavyweight champ? What happens?
That's going to be something that right now he is fighting for us at heavyweight. If he loses, he'll go back to 205. If he wins, then he's going to have a decision whether to stay at heavyweight or to move back down to 205. Because as you know, Ryan's a big kid. That guy's a big 205er. So I'm sure cutting weight is not an easy task for him. But at the end of the day, Kevin, it's going to be up to him. And putting this tournament together, really, it was there's certain fighters that made a lot of sense. And I said, you know what? Let's sprinkle it with Bader, who easily could be a heavyweight. King Mo fought at heavyweight in Japan for Ryzen a couple of times in the last 2 years. Let's just make this interesting. And you don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Bader can end up winning the whole thing. King Mo can end up winning the whole thing. And with Chael wanted in. He's like, look, it doesn't matter. I don't care what weight. I just want to fight. And so that's how he got in the tournament. And I said, look, this is a tournament that is going to be a lot of fun to watch. It's going to be really interesting. A lot of great storylines. And it's something that we'd be really proud of launching on the Paramount Network on January 20th.
So let's talk about that January 20th show then. I think Chael against Rampage is an interesting fight. I mean, Rampage. I even saw it on the promo that you did, a very well done promo where you had them out together and they were talking. And Rampage, he already started. It's been his constant complaint: UFC fights and Bellator fights. Guys want to wrestle me, and I always, when I hear Rampage say that, I wonder, Rampage, this is MMA. This is not boxing. What are you thinking? Does he bring that up to you? Do you think that's just part of the shtick? Does he talk to you about that? And in that fight, do you see Rampage being able to keep the fight off the floor against Chael?
You know what? I'll tell you. I believe that anybody that fights Rampage, Kevin, is going to become a wrestler if they're not a wrestler already. Because if this guy punches you, I mean, King Mo told me, he said that's the hardest he's ever been hit, by anybody boxing or fighting kickboxing in the gym or MMA. He said Rampage is exceptionally strong and very dangerous. So if you're going to fight a guy like Rampage, you're not going to want to stand there and start slugging with him. I mean, and if we left it up to Rampage, you'd probably fight a more traditional striker. Maybe like a Roy Nelson or a Matt Mitrione, somebody that comes out strong too. But we thought that, look, this is going to be something that could be very interesting. Can a Chael, Sonnen take Rampage down? And Rampage has been working on that takedown defense in his gym with Tiki over there, and they've been, Rampage told me, he goes, I'll give him $10,000 for every takedown that that he gets on me, right? I'm like, well, you better put that.
I was going to hold him to that.
Yeah, who's going to hold that, right? But he believes that he will not be able to take him down and that he's going to knock him out. That's what Rampage believes. Chael, I'm sure, believes he's going to take him down and he's going to control the fight and he's going to outlast or outwork Rampage, for the victory. That's what I think the technique will be.
It's going to be an interesting fight then. I guess the fight that everybody wants to see, the fighter that everybody wants to see is Fedor. He's opening up in the Grand Prix against Frank Mir, who I think I'd like to get your thoughts on. I think is an interesting story in this, coming back from a drug test suspension. But let's start with Fedor first. I mean, obviously Fedor, one of the great fighters of all time, one of the legends of the sport. I was looking at his record before I called you, Scott. It's been a long time since he beaten another guy in that guy's prime. Does Fedor have anything left? I mean, what do you see in Fedor that makes you think he's a contender in this field right now?
When you talk about heavyweights, Kevin, it's like with Mitrione. They both punch each other in the face, knock each other down. Mitrione got up a little faster. Probably his football training kicked in at that point, right? And then he finished Fedor, but it could have easily went the other way, And so, yes, has he had, guys that are fighting, into their, 30s now, should not be fighting 21-year-old kids like he was doing in the past. But this is the perfect tournament for him, and he wanted to come in. Kevin, he said to me, through Jerry and the translator, he said, "Look, I know that this is the fourth quarter for me, and that I want to come and compete, and I would love to be Bellator's, heavyweight world champion." So when Fedor asks you that, Kevin, what are you going to do? You're going to say no?
Yeah.
You have to say yes. And so we did, and we gave him that respect, and he's going to have an equal shot just like everybody else. And if you look at him and Frank Mir, it's kind of like, okay, Frank Mir's coming off some losses, Fedor's coming off some losses. This is kind of an equal fight to me in my mind, and it's going to be great.
I think it's a very interesting fight. On Fedor, do you believe that we're kind of on Fedor to watch, like where every fight could be the last one, given his age and what's going on? Like if he loses to Mir, that's it, or if he loses to the Chael Rampage winner, would that be it? What's your gut feeling?
I believe that he hasn't decided yet, but I think that I wouldn't be surprised if if he, let's say for instance, fought the tournament out and won the tournament, that he would retire as a tournament champion and then the heavyweight champion, right? What a way to have a great send off, right? Or if you lose the first fight to Frank Mir and he gets stopped, whatever, he might call it a day too. So it's when you have somebody special that's been such a special athlete for MMA, and every time he gets in the ring, it's special. I mean, in New York when he walked out, standing ovation as he's walking out. I mean, he still has that X factor,
right,
that people want to see him. and he's been this great ambassador for MMA worldwide. So anytime he steps into the cage, it's a very special occasion, and that's what fans will see in this tournament is that they're going to see Fedor fight Frank Mir. I mean, I'm really excited about that fight. To be honest, that's something that I'm going to really enjoy, just sitting there with the best seat in the house and watching all unfold.
In my mind, Mir is arguably the greatest big man in terms of submissions in MMA. You can talk about Verdum and, of course, Fedor, himself. But, I mean, Mir is a big guy. And the way he moves or moved in his prime. I wonder, though, if he has that movement and that quickness now. Would that be the concern that, he doesn't have the athleticism that he had as a younger, fitter guy, when he was in his mid-20s?
Well, I think that we'll see in April. Because Fedor is still extremely fast, and he can get there quick. And he didn't get there quick enough for Mitrione, but it was like, a millisecond. The same. That was really a weird situation when they both knocked each other down. I thought they were both out when they first went down, Kevin.
Yeah.
But with these heavyweight fights, Kevin, you never know because one punch could change the whole thing. One takedown could change the whole thing. If Frank gets Fedor is Frank gonna be able to submit Fedor even? Is he good enough to submit Fedor on the ground? The only person that's ever done that is Fabricio Verdum, back in the day, and but I don't think he's ever been submitted before, on the ground besides Fabricio. So is Frank Mir good enough on the ground? And then if it stands up, is he good enough striker? And is he fast enough? That's what we'll see.
It's going to be an interesting one. Before I transition to MacDonald and Lima, I want to ask you some Rory MacDonald questions. You're going up against UFC pay-per-view that night, and they happen to have one of the best heavyweight fights that I've been looking forward to a long time. Are you disappointed that UFC 220 is going right head-to-head with your show? Because obviously it can't be good for either show to have, some people are going to want to watch Rampage, some people are going to want to watch Stipe and Francis, so and DC is going to be fighting on that card as well. Is that disappointing when you see that they're both on the same night?
I mean, look, it's we both have businesses to run, and this isn't something that we're planning to go head to head, or it just happened that with the way it happened. And I look at it like it is what it is. And at the end of the day, our programming is free on Paramount Network. It's a big fight card. Ticket sales are actually better than the Ortiz versus Chael Sonnen fight last year at this time. So things are very good. I think we're getting some good momentum, and I feel good about it. And when I look at the competitive landscape of this, Kevin, it's not this, and I really feel this way. Like, MMA has a certain audience, right? And I think the hardcore is going to want to watch both, right? But can we get the outside audience that is like a fringe participant?
Right.
That's who we're trying to get in to pull in to watch this fight. And guys like Rampage and Chael have access to those people, and will draw those people in. But Kevin, when I look at the competitive landscape, really, it's like the NBA. The Golden State Warriors are playing the Houston Rockets that night on ABC primetime. That's going to be their and our competitor. That's going to be our competitor. Really, it's not going to be each other. And
The free TV, because UFC is going to get a different audience because of pay-per-view. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it's like they have their own fan base. I think we have our fan base. We're free on TV. But what I'm saying is there's so much different sports other than just MMA
Understood.
that we compete against.
Right.
Showtime has a boxing fight, right? So, there could be a fragmentation of our sports audience, amongst 4 or 5 different platforms, not just between us and the UFC.
Top Rank is doing boxing on ESPN now, and one of the things that I've been happy to see is that they are drawing very well 18 to 34 on that network. So obviously that is the MMA demographic, 18 to 34, 18 to 49. So that's another thing that's going to cut away at the pie in terms of trying to everybody get their little piece of viewership. Does that concern you at all? When you look at that, because they're going to be drawing this. Again, their basic cable going to be drawing the same fighters that you are, not necessarily on this night, but on other nights.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of boxing too, Kevin. So
I know you are.
I try to watch it all. And traditionally, we try to go on Fridays unless we're on the West Coast. And so that's if you look at our 24 dates for this year, I would say 4 of them will be on a Saturday night. So the fights that we do on Friday night, traditionally there's no other MMA on there. Like there's no UFC fights, there's no Showtime boxing, there's no, so we kind of have our own night. But the fights on the West Coast are tough to do on a Friday night because you just can't get to, trying to get to the forum on a Friday night at 6 p.m. to watch an event is super challenging. Same thing in the Bay Area here. So we've chosen to do our fights here on a Saturday on the West Coast. But, I don't think the competitive landscape, like I said, on Friday, it's much more open for us than competing with, all the other events on Saturday.
Yeah, I really look forward to that MacDonald Lima fight. I think that's an interesting fight. And I wonder, Rory did a good thing, I think, for his health. He took a long time off. He had Robbie Lawler fight. He took a year off. He had the Stephen Thompson fight, basically 11 months off. And now he's back in, what is it, 8 or 9 months, so he's kind of paced himself. But I wonder, going up against a guy like Lima, who is a top end guy who has been active, will Rory MacDonald's relative lack of inactivity come back to haunt him in that fight?
Kevin, I don't believe so because I saw him in England fight in London when he fought Paul Daly. I mean, he just dismantled Paul.
Yes, he did.
Like nobody's business. And Paul is a seasoned veteran that's fought everybody. One of the greatest rounds of MMA was him and Nick Diaz in San Diego in Strikeforce. I mean, this guy's fought everybody. And to me, what Roy did to him, it made him just look like he was a beginner. And so to me, that shows me that he is continuing to train during those times when he's been down. And he's continued to learn and stayed active and didn't let himself get out of shape and come back into shape and get out of shape. So, to me, that's a sign of a true martial artist, is somebody that, has that ability to always stay focused and stay in shape, ready to go, even if he's not competing. And so it's a way of life for him. And when I think about this fight, I think this is going to be a big test for Rory. And I think that, listen, Lima is our champion, but he's knocked out some big fighters. He's been in the cage with some of the best in the world, and he's going to give Rory a handful. And I think it's going to be a great fight. That's another fight I'm really looking forward to. Just sitting down and putting my feet up on the desk and watching it as a fan. Not on the desk, but you know what I mean.
I know what you're saying. When you put that show together, I'm just curious of how this happens as a promoter. So you could have Rampage and Chael be your main event because it's in the Grand Prix, and people love heavyweights. And of course, you alluded to earlier, they have the big names of the group. Obviously, MacDonald and Lima as a title fight. You're going with MacDonald and Lima as or I should say Lima and MacDonald as your main event. How do you make that decision? And was there ever any thought to flipping it?
Yeah, you know what? And to be honest, like that's a television decision, and I still think they're going back and forth on it. And I think a lot of it is going to be timing and whatever. But at the end of the day, I think we'll probably have that final answer, the final bout order, by this Friday.
Okay. Coming up. Sounds good. And then lastly, you had Heather Hardy fight on your big show in June. It was kind of a tough night for her after her comeback. She won that fight, comes back and kind of struggles there. Anna Hulaton was on that card. She kind of struggled. There was talk of them fighting. Are you still thinking about that, or is that gone because they both lost?
No, we're still trying to work that out. So, maybe that's something we put together, in the next couple months back there on the East Coast. But we are still trying to put that fight together.
What and from the intrigue of that fight, I mean, is it less now because of their respective losses? And maybe say, hey, it would be a better fight if they fought in boxing, or do you feel like an MMA fight is still as viable, even though they both kind of are neophytes in their MMA careers?
Kevin, I still think it would be a competitive matchup, and to me, it's like both those girls came into a situation where they're it's like MMA is like a second sport for them, and boxing is their first sport for them. So, let them compete in MMA, and then, it doesn't matter who wins, but then they come back in boxing and do it again.
So you're gonna do that then?
Well, no, we're not gonna.
No, but you agree to let them do it. They would do that.
Yeah, we said, wait, why not? It's let them compete and go back if they want to go back to boxing and try boxing. And we told Lou DiBella, hey, we'll support you for sure we would not mind that at all. I think that would be fantastic.
But just to clarify, though, as an MMA fight, you have not officially put that fight together. It's not on your schedule yet.
It's not on the schedule. It's not. It's something that we're working towards, but it's not inked yet.
Okay, good stuff. Well, I appreciate it, Scott. Good luck on the 20th, and of course, all throughout the year. You can see Scott on the Paramount Network. Used to be Spike, so I mean there will be a little bit of transition there for you. But good luck. I wish you all the best, and I appreciate you coming on with me today.
Yeah, tune in. Don't forget, January 20th. It's at 9 p.m. on Paramount.
Paramount Network. Be there. Thank you,
Kevin.
Scott. Appreciate you always.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.